こんにちは。Hello.
I'm Keiko and I'm
I'm Mark Kubumatsu.
Inorganic filters are things like zinc oxide and
But when you get a disease, what they love in Russia.
Barbell Radio.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for listening to Barbell Radio. This is your host, Canon. I have an information-packed episode today on the show. I speak with a guest who is currently a PhD candidate at Auckland University of Technology, located in the beautiful country of New Zealand, looking at rapid weight loss for powerlifters. He's also a very well-known powerlifting coach and nutritionist at The Strength Guys, as well as being a powerlifting athlete himself in the 83 kilo weight class. I'm excited to introduce Kedric Kwan today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. Watashi wa Kedric desu. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu. That's all the Japanese I know. So that's the only part of the whole podcast you don't have to translate into Japanese, but the rest, I'm sorry, you have a lot of work to do there. But yeah, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the invitation, and you actually did a really good job in terms of introducing my background. So I guess that there isn't really much to say besides, my research primarily focuses on rapid weight loss for the strength athlete, but predominantly on powerlifters, simply due to the fact that that is the sport that I'm currently involved in. And yeah, I guess that is all. Oh, and I also really enjoy eating. Another of my specialty is critiquing ramen. So that's something else I really enjoy as well. And yeah.
Great. Okay. As you greeted us in Japanese at the start, you are you like an anime fan, or what are you? Do you like going to Japan and that's why you speak a little bit of Japanese, or what is it?
So I definitely am a huge anime fan, and what got me to kind of try to learn Japanese was because during the first lockdown last year, I had a bunch of time. So I thought, okay, cool. Maybe let's try learning some form of Japanese. Wow. And yeah, but I found it actually quite difficult simply due to the fact that reading the characters. I mean, I speak Mandarin, right? So I'm from Malaysia originally, so I can speak Mandarin and I can read Mandarin as well. So Japanese is kind of like Mandarin, where you have to recognize characters, you know? Yeah, so that is quite difficult. And then not to mention, you all have kanji, hiragana, katakana all combined. I'm like, dude, this is way too much for me, right? And when I actually learned it, I kind of learned Romaji only. So I read how to pronounce, but I mean, I tried my best. But all I can say now are the regular greetings and the certain catchphrases that anime characters shout when you're fighting.
Right. No, because Yuki actually told me to message you and it'd be really cool to have him on the show, and then he says he also speaks Japanese, and I told him maybe I can I can do a podcast with him in Japanese, and he's like, I don't know if he speaks that well of Japanese.
Yeah, I think I think the important phrases is greeting and greetings and asking where the toilet is. Toire wa doko desu ka? Right? So that's important, I guess. So these are the important things I know. But that my vocabulary just stops there.
But I've always wondered, as you speak Mandarin, is it, I know you can't, maybe you might not be able to understand hearing Japanese, but reading Japanese, you have certain characters that mean the same, right? So does that make it easier for you to read signs and stuff?
So I can understand because kanji is literally just Chinese characters, right? I think Japanese you have kanji, which is, it means Hanzi. Hanzi is Chinese characters, and then in Korean, right, you have hanja, which is also Chinese characters. So it's easy for me to recognize, but it's the pronunciation is not even close at all. So for example, rain in Chinese is yu, xia yu, right? But in Japanese, it's the same character, but it's ame, right? So I'm like, nah, this is not. And the thing is, when it's Chinese characters, one character is one syllable, right? But Ame is like, it's one character, but there's 2 syllables. So it's like, I cannot like register in my head.
Right.
So it is a little harder in that instance. I know some people actually get confused. Some people find it easier. Some people find it harder, but there definitely are similarities in terms of characters. But I think that recognizing, and another thing that's really difficult as well is the combination of kanji, hiragana, katakana into like one sentence. You can have 3. It's like quite difficult, you know? Yeah.
That's crazy. I didn't know that every like Chinese character is only one syllable. Like if you try to write a sentence, it must take ages to write it. Because one character is like takes ages to even write.
Yeah,
one.
it's very inefficient, right? So like even now in like there's like simplified Chinese, which is essentially like less strokes. And so the traditional Chinese, they have more strokes, but it just has only one syllable. So a sentence can be quite long, right? Yeah.
Wow, that's really fascinating to me. Wow, I did not know that. Okay, so I'll be translating a bit of this show into Japanese as well, because I feel like I hardly come across like evidence-based information on powerlifting, nutrition, and weight cut information in Japan. And I feel like it's highly beneficial for a lot of athletes. And that kind of made me wonder, do you think information regarding to like sports science is limited throughout Asian countries like Japan and maybe Malaysia? Because, you know, we have language barriers and not a lot of information comes through in Japanese. So it limits, you know, the availability for people to understand, I think. Do you see that?
Oh, what 100%. I do think as well is there's definitely a cultural influence. If we look at Japanese, like for example, in like we use Japanese and like Korean culture, there are not many like men who are muscular, you know. So I was watching this reality TV called like it's called Terrace House. I'm sure like you're aware of it. Yeah. And then they'll say, oh, this guy is like really muscular. And when I look at him, it's like, nah, it's not muscular at all, you know. So our kind of like perception of muscularity is very different. And in the Western world, when you are muscular, you probably be like, oh, you have to be like The Rock or Chris Hemsworth, like you have to be really jacked, you know.
Right.
And I think what science does, and the beauty about science, is that it allows us to push the limits. So I think that the motivation in the West might be a little bit higher simply due to the fact that we have this idea of what muscularity might look like, and then we want to push past that. Whereas in the Asian country, we have this level of muscularity, and once we reach there, it's like cool, right? And our most muscular ideal in the Asian country is much lower than what it is like in the West as well. So I guess it's about like reaching the limit, and I think that potentially could affect the dissemination of information. It's also due to the fact that historically and culturally, parents like sports science definitely do not fall under one of those career options where you should pursue. Your parents will ask you to pursue, you know. Right. So with lack of talent or lack of human capital in that area, information isn't as widespread. But if you ask any like Asian person, like you just throw a rock, right? In like go in an Asian country, you throw a rock, might hit an accountant, you know, like the likelihood of you hitting somebody working in business or in accounting is really high. So I think the expertise kind of like shift due to cultural demands and also demands of the current marketplace as well. I would like in Malaysia, being a sports scientist or being a nutritionist doesn't really pay well. Whereas in the Western country, they actually do pay well. And like I said, you could go back towards my thought process where because they are trying to surpass certain limits, they probably need more support staff to help like the top athletes, right? That's why you hire like top athletes, they have nutritionists, they have physiotherapists, like personal, like strength and conditioning coach, like one staff playing a single role for like a single athlete. So a single athlete might have like 5 personal staff for them because they really want to like transcend like certain limits, like breaking records. Whereas in Asia, it's like cool, right? The personal trainer is everything. We always have this joke where a personal trainer is a counselor, nutritionist, trainer, everything. And it's also funny because the less money you can pay for someone who can accomplish multiple roles, the better, because you're like actually saving money.
Yeah.
Whereas, efficiency, right? Whereas in the West, you kind of like, they are willing to spend, which also create more job opportunities.
Right.
So yeah, I gave you quite a long answer on why I think that the information is not that out there yet.
Right. And from a researcher perspective, do you think a language is also a big thing?
Oh, it definitely is, right? So for example, my supervisor is Dr. Eric Helms. So a lot of people would know who he is. And he has two very very popular books, right? The Muscle and Strength Pyramids. And recently he had it translated into Mandarin. And he passed me a copy. And when he gave a copy to me, and when I look at certain words, I have no idea what they are because it's like specialized terms, you know?
Right.
Like if I say rapid weight loss, right? And I ask you to translate rapid weight loss into Japanese, you probably translate to like weight loss something hayai, you know, which is like lose weight fast. But that's not actually what we're trying to say. We're not saying I want to help you lose weight fast. Rapid weight loss means something very specific. So I guess there are certain terms that are not available yet in basically not available when you try to Google translate it, you know. So like
so it could really come across completely differently if you think about that.
Yeah, like I said, you know, like I know weight loss like fast is like hayai or that's hurry, right? So if you put that like lose weight, people will think like, oh, lose weight fast. So it's all like a very specialized term, you know.
Right.
Like even in my specific field as well, the research is still relatively new. So it's not even like when I go on the street and I meet someone, I say, oh, I'm doing rapid weight loss. Everybody say, oh, teach me how I can lose weight fast, right? That's their perception, you know? Right. So even within the English speaking community, people still don't understand the terms. Can you imagine if you're trying to translate it to a culture or country where exposure to sports science in general is less? So I think that could act as quite a big barrier as well.
And there is no one to really blame for that either, because person who's translating will have a very hard time. I think starting strength was just translated into Japanese last year or the year before, and I'm sure some of the terms in there was very tricky to translate as well. So I mean, from the point of like people who's translating, it must be extremely tricky as well.
Yep, I 100% agree.
Yeah, and you brought up, I think, like 5 points of why evidence-based information is not as available as much as it is in Western cultures, because one is because of the culture, you know, even in anime, I think, like, for example, everyone knows like Naruto, and, you know, he's like a hero, right? Everyone in there is such a hero who's like strong, who's fast, who can do anything. But even then, it's like, they're not very like muscular figure. So it's like, I can see that portrayed in the anime as well. And also I think 2 is upbringing, like you said. It's not like one of those like ideal professions that parents want you to pursue, and also financial issues, and also the demand in the market as well, and also values is maybe stopping, you know, information coming through to Asia as well, and also the language. So that's a lot of that's a lot of barriers. Like what do you think? How do you fix that? What can you do about it?
It is quite I think it is quite loaded question, and my answer might just be a gross simplification, but I think what we can do is just create exposure and awareness. Like personally for myself, currently I am being employed by the strength guys while doing my PhD. So whatever I earn in Canadian dollars, right? For example, right? Or USD. So I earn the North American currency. And if money is a thing for people, because they're like, oh, if you work in the sports industry, you might not earn as much. But truth be told, if I were to take the amount I earn and convert it back into my local Malaysian currency, I actually earn probably as much or close to what maybe somebody that is like working like 5-6 years in the bank, you know, right? And I'm not saying that I'm earning a lot, but like I said, that's my potential, because you have to also take into consideration that what I'm doing now is I'm also doing it part-time while studying part-time. So if I'm doing it full-time, right, I can potentially earn close to what they earn in their currency, in my local currency. So if that is the thing, and I also would think that in general the Asian currency is a little bit smaller, but what you want to, I think the thing is, if you look at it from this perspective, if you think money is an issue, I don't really think it would be. If you look at value, I think if you can create value for people, right, and you can show them what the value you can provide, people are willing to pay for that. And the parents thing, and like that's a tricky one, right? If like for me, I would say it is quite, I'm quite like blessed that my parents are quite supportive in this area, and I can also understand that there are parents who would not like support the decision of the child. They want like the child to do something specific. But I do think like with them, like the more and more people out there who actually pursue this and actually create an example that this is something possible or it's a viable career option, then it would be it will sit a little bit better with the parents. I think for someone who, the first person who kind of like paved the way, it's always the hardest because it's quite unknown, right? But for someone who is actually just trying to follow the footsteps of someone that has already done it, the parents might see it as a little safer. But I also do think what we can do as well is, at least this is what I did with my parents, is I showed them like the things that I wanted. This is what I wanted to do. I showed them that so my background is that I went the typical like business route, right? I studied marketing in college before I actually switched over, right? And when I tried to convince my parents to switch, I said, right, cool. I've been getting good grades in college and everything like that, right? In fact, before I left my marketing course, I actually not graduated, but that end of like the second year, I was awarded like Dean's List, meaning like you're like the top whatever 10% in your course. So I was I was awarded that, but I told my parents, so what? Like to me, like getting this award really means nothing because I don't enjoy what I'm doing. And then I showed them that, cool, these are like books, resources that I bought with my own money. I look for online, right? I literally had like a stack of books, and like I showed them like, this is also what I've been doing on the side while studying in college, right? While you both of you are at work, so you all don't really know this is what I do. So I showed them like my determination, and it's very easy to say that, it'll be a very different story if I absolutely suck at college. It's like I'm failing, therefore I want to switch. But my parents would be like, cool, like for me to actually switch when I'm doing well, that made my parents think as well, like could he, if he's already good at something that he doesn't enjoy, imagine if someone is actually enjoying what they do, they will be even better at it, right? So I think that kind of like stirred up some thoughts in my parents. So I do think that I'm not encouraging your listeners to go out and defy your parents and rebel, but I think that if you have the drive, if you have the motivation, and of course you have to always seek out knowledge, and if you can kind of like display that and try to convince your parents, showing them something substantial, I do think that would be a useful step. At least that is what I've experienced. So
yeah, for sure. I think it's Asian parenting is so different, right, to Western.
Very, very different.
Because I grew up in Australia as well, and when I went there, I thought my parents were like trapping me into this prison, and they didn't let me do anything. But that was what was normal in Japan. And I graduated from university, and I really didn't want to work in corporate. Like everybody went into a large company and doing something completely unrelated to what they studied at university. And I really didn't want to do that. So I told my parents, I want to give it a few years until, to work on this powerlifting thing, and, maybe like doing this podcast and doing things like that. And they were really, really supportive. And I feel that they're on the supportive side. And it sounds like your parents are too, but it's crazy how different the upbringing is, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. I think a large part essentially comes down to, at least this is why I think, it's like your parents just want you to do well, right? And they might have an idea of what doing well would look like, hence they might think that this is the best way to do it. If you can show them that perhaps there are more than one, that there's more than one way to do well, and try to convince them, that would be the first step, Like, I did not tell my parents I want to completely switch. I said, give me 1 year, right? Give me 1 year to prove myself. And if I don't do well this 1 year, I'll go back, Like, they knew I meant business, I'm not trying to like just, I'm tired of studying and just like muck around and be lazy. So I do think that you kind of like have to navigate that a little bit with your parents. You also need to know, like, I know that deep inside we like, especially for people who are listening, who are young, deep inside we have all these desires that we want to do and we just want to tell our parents, I think this is what should be done. But I think that if you actually like slowly throw the breadcrumbs down, it actually works so much better. Ease it in with your parents. It works so much better than just like saying, I want to do everything, And my mom was so surprised when she's like, what's happening? Like the funny story on how I did it was I actually set my parents down and I said that I had a presentation I have to do for college, an assignment for college. But my presentation was actually why I wanted to leave college, right? Yeah, so I did a PowerPoint presentation to convince them, because if I have this conversation with them over the dinner table, we'd probably be fighting and throwing food at one another, or like somebody's going to storm off the dinner table. But if I can sit them down and then try to present my point, and I think that also showed like I mean business and I put in a lot of effort into doing all of this, because to actually present a PowerPoint presentation implies that you took time to make that PowerPoint presentation, which implies that you're actually more serious, So I think like all of that kind of like helped as well. I'm not saying that this will work for everybody, but other than myself, for your listeners out there, apparently Emma Stone actually did a PowerPoint presentation to like tell her parents she wanted to be an actress or something like that. So, I only found out like way after I actually did this, but yeah, fun fact.
Wait, so like, what are your parents like now? They're full on board.
Yeah, they're fully on board. I mean, like, when you're doing a PhD, at the end you become a doctor, right? So as an Asian parents, like you can tell everybody that my son got a PhD, he's a doctor. I think that they are on board. Although I would say that up to today, they have completely no idea what I'm studying for my PhD.
Wow.
They'll just probably say, lifting weights and something in nutrition. It's like, nutrition, lifting weights.
Yeah.
Like you say, like even if you go back to the point of like a language barrier, talking to the layperson, I mean, these are my parents, I probably tell them like 100 times what I'm studying, but they still cannot understand what it is. Because like I said, when you are doing a PhD, it is very niche and it is very focused. So yeah, they are 100% supportive. I think not just because of the perception that doing a PhD is very prestigious. I told my parents, I said like, if I do a PhD in this field, I'm probably not gonna be rich because of the PhD. So don't get your hopes too high, Right. But I think that they've seen where I've come from, and they look at what I've done, and they are really supportive, So I am also like the first of my family to actually study abroad as well, right? Living abroad. All my other family members they're all still in Malaysia. So yeah, I think that we all are kind of like successful in our own way, but I think that looking at how I am doing without the support of my parents, not living under the same roof, they can see that, okay, cool, he's actually doing quite well. And I think that these are stories that people kind of need to hear, that it's going to be scary, but it's if you really want it, I think if you do it smartly, right, people can actually do it.
And I also think it's a lot of courage for you. It's maybe in Australia or in the Western culture, it's normal to do what you want to do, but that's not necessarily true in Asian countries. It's more like you have expectations from your family, by society, and things like that. And for you to confess to your parents and try to do what you want to do, it must have taken like a lot of courage. Yep.
And I don't think it's like a false dichotomy where if you don't follow your parents' wishes, it means that you are not an obedient child. Like I said, their idea, right, is I don't think parents are like, you have to follow every single of my instruction to show that you are obedient. I think that to honor your parents, there are certain principles. I think at the end of the day, we grow up to be good people in society, right? And we are like doing decently well financially, and whatever your goals are, right? Parents will be supportive in general. So I do think that if we can kind of like get past that fear of thinking that, oh, if I'm doing this, I'm a rebel and I'm dishonoring my parents, or I'm bringing shame to my family, that kind of stuff. And you can kind of like, that's the first step to overcome. I'm not on the side that I have to completely fulfill everything I do is only for personal happiness. I am this individual. I'm very individualistic. I'm definitely not on that side. I do think that my upbringing do kind of like inculcate certain sense of honor towards my parents, but I do think that there is more than one way to do it, especially in the context of trying to like do something different from what my parents wish. So yeah.
And also, just moving on a little bit, like you told me that you made a switch from like a whole business degree to what you're doing now. Why did you become interested in the whole world of sports science?
So in Asia, like I said, in the Asian population is quite rare, but I started like lifting in my last year of high school, right? And because like as a 17-year-old boy at the time, right? Everybody want to gain muscle, everybody want to look good, we all want to like make sure like the girls take notice of us. But the funny thing is that we always say we go to the gym to make sure the girls take notice of us, but in the end it's actually all the boys that come up to you and say, "Oh bro, you're getting you're getting buff, your legs are huge, man. Can you tell me how to do this? Do you have any tips for me to get like six packs like you?" I'm like, okay, cool. And from there I kind of like, because of my curiosity and my inquisitive nature, if I can provide an answer or that has been helpful for me, I would share it. If I can't, I'll go and look up online. So I just went down that rabbit hole. And during that time, it's also like, this was like maybe, man, I feel old for saying this, but like it's like 10 years ago. It's when blogging was like really big, like there was no Instagram, right? Like Facebook and like Twitter wasn't that big. So people actually read stuff that is longer than 140 characters or an Instagram post or story. People actually read blogs, and every blog they will link an article to another article. So they just link it, and then I just keep going down the rabbit hole, and I found it really, really fascinating. Not to mention in high school as well, the only science subject I was good at was biology, right? So like the study of the human body. So it kind of is sort of like related, like exercise science, the human body, and then that made me interested. And it's just that Malaysia doesn't have the right environment or the schools or university to allow people to study sports science. So if I were to study sports science, I would have to travel overseas, and traveling overseas is really expensive. Not only do you have a high currency conversion rate, but you also pay international fees, which makes it even higher.
Right.
So I didn't have, and my family were not like well-to-do, and so I decided to take the typical route, right? But at one point, I just felt like the more I learn about like exercise science, right, the less interested I am in the things that the marketing studies that I do, even though I'm like getting good grades in class all the time, but deep down inside, I know this is not what I want to do. And I know that if I don't do it now, right, and I try to switch something, right, try to switch my degree after I finish, or when I finish my degree and try to study a second one, I'll probably be like, oh, you finish your studies, go and look for a job. And once you go down that circle, it's actually like quite hard to get out, So I thought, okay, cool. I let's get out now, And truth be told, I got out at around the right time, because if I were more than halfway or I have one more year, I'll probably just finish it. But I had like, I was only like halfway through. So I said, cool, right? I'm at the point where people can't tell me that I've not tried it, because I've done at least 2 years of it and I have 2 years more, but I know that I'm not too deep into it, that pulling out now might be foolish, So I felt like that was the best time. And like, obviously, like I said, if in a counterfactual world where I didn't do well, I would have to hold up my end of the bargain and that I told my parents and go back to school, right? After that 1 year didn't work out. So, but thank God. And obviously with determination and trying to like seek out opportunities, like everything worked out and here I am.
Okay. So you actually you transferred university or you quit and then you went abroad straight away?
So I quit and then I went to Australia first, funny enough, to Brisbane. Yeah, I was in Brisbane for an internship, right, for 3 months. And then when I was there, I was looking for what I have to do next. And then I found this online course, which is it's not mandatory to actually attend classes in person, but the classes are based in London, right? So I studied online. And after that, I used that. It's a postgraduate diploma. So I used a postgraduate diploma to enroll for a master's. And then that is when I studied full-time in London for a year. And after I graduated from my master's, I went back to Malaysia. I worked for 2 years before deciding to do my PhD. And then I decided to do my PhD after 2 years of working. And then, the PhD is in New Zealand. So I've been to Australia, the UK, and now in this like lower, right, the lower portion of the southern hemisphere in New Zealand to kind of like, in a way you can say pursue this career path.
Right. So, and, maybe people who look at you now would be like, oh, look at this really smart Malaysian guy, like, known by everybody, and doing his PhD overseas. But it sounds like it's been a really long path for you. Right?
It has, but I don't think it is quite funny when I look back. I never thought that I would be doing a PhD. The perception of a PhD is somebody who's very like academically inclined, and all of that. And one of my friends from New Zealand actually went back home to my high school to visit some of the high school teachers. And she told them that I'm doing my PhD. None of them believed it. They're like, what? Right? Because so in my entire year, there are only 2 people that are doing PhD. One is me and another one who is like this like girl who is like really smart. So she's doing like she's doing a PhD in like stats or something. So it's like more high level than mine. So, but I was just this really like naughty and mischievous like boy in high school. So nobody, especially all my high school teachers, did not expect me to do a PhD. I wasn't like top of the class, like my average is like 60%, in high school. And if you don't get 80%, you're already a failure to your parents. So 60% is like definitely way worse, So So they did not expect me to do it. I think that it's just not really about being smart. It's more about like, I think if you really find something that you enjoy and you're passionate about, and one big component that I think that really drives me is the ability to use what I've learned to help other people as well. Because I do see the impact, I do see the returns, right? Where someone is happy, or when someone makes weight for their powerlifting comp, or when someone does well for powerlifting comp, they're like, oh, thank you, coach, thank you for helping me, right? Like that is so much more rewarding than like people give it like getting a high salary where you don't really see the direct impact. So I find that to be particularly motivating for me. And that drives me to be better, because the better I am, the more I can help other people. So that is at least the thought process that I have.
Right. Yeah, because it sounds like you excel at a lot of things that you have done. Like even with your business degree, sound like you said you were, a really, really good student. But like I really want to know what you found in the whole sports science thing that made you want to switch over. Like what is it about sports science? And it sounds like it's the seeing you help other people, and that makes you happy. But then that's something that you can't really have in the business world, is it? Yeah, definitely. I think that, when we talk about all of this, when we look at it from this perspective, it's a direct impact. So, in business, usually I think there are different kinds of people. There are some people where they like to impact people's life directly, and I'm definitely geared towards that. Whereas you have some that I want to earn money earn a lot of money, and then I give to charity, right? So my impact isn't as direct, I don't work with people in the trenches, and that's fine. Everybody, we're different. Our goals are different. But I do think that for my personal, like how I am and how I grew up, right? Perhaps that has geared me towards working directly with people. And I think working as a coach, as a personal trainer or as a coach, is a very one-on-one job. You talk to people, you interact with people. Whereas someone who is probably not as I would say, not comfortable in social settings, because as a personal trainer, the first time you meet a client, that person, you completely don't know them, and then if you
first it might be really daunting, but because I'm slightly more extroverted in nature, I tend to be able to navigate those social situations better. Whereas some people might be geared towards, like, for example, I'm not saying I don't want to use bad stereotypes, but like, let's just say people who are like coders who work in computer science, they can change the world. I mean, Facebook changed the world, right? Like, I don't know whether this is true, and like maybe Mark Zuckerberg was just like really socially awkward and he just wanted for him to be able to connect with people without actually seeing them in person. This might be a complete fabrication, but that changed the world, you know. So I do think that impacting and changing the world or changing a society can happen in different schemes. For me, it's just that working with people directly allowed me to reap the biggest reward. And I think for people like that are out there as well, you know, just because this is what has been fulfilling for me doesn't mean it will be fulfilling for you. You kind of have to understand what fulfills you and in what way does it fulfill you. But I do think everybody, whether you're male, female, whatever skin color you are, how old you are, there's a small or big part of us that would definitely gain satisfaction from helping other people.
Right.
Whenever like people ask me about my story, I always remember this quote is by Viktor Frankl. So Viktor Frankl is like this Holocaust survivor, and he became like a psychologist, right? And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah,
and
I haven't read that yet.
He said that happiness, like success, cannot be pursued. It needs to be ensue, which means that you would find it when you dedicate yourself to something larger than yourself. So you have to do something, you know, that is not just solely for you, but something more than bigger than you, a cause that's larger than you, and then that's when you find your happiness. And I think that is like really true. So whenever I tell people, I always use this quote because I find it to be really helpful for me. But like I said, what makes this is just like a general like word of advice, but to go a little bit more into detail, people have to kind of like reflect and know what actually fulfills them.
Yeah. And it sounds like even with if you continue to pursue your career of business, it's more like providing a service and product to a large population, whereas in coaching and things like that, it's like you said, it's more direct, one-on-one, and that's something that you enjoy doing, and that's why maybe that's a key thing to why you made that transition as well.
100%. I think that, like I said, like for me now, when I first start, I definitely enjoy the one-on-one thing. But I think as I kind of like evolve in my career as well, and my thought process also changed, I like to be able to coaches, you know, like educate people. Because my thought process is that cool, I've known what it feels like to help people on the ground, you know. But I know there are also a lot of poor information out there that might be detrimental. And what if I can actually raise people, right, and help people to impact people correctly, you know? So then now my reach will be wider, right? Yeah. So I think in general, people do kind of like progress towards that, especially when they are kind of like much older. I'm not trying to sound old, but when you don't have that much energy to be on the ground all the time, you know, you kind of like, you know, you start your coaching course, or you start like you have like online internships, you know, like, and you speak to people on, oh, this is how I do my coaching, and people learn, and then they're like, cool, this is what I've learned, and then I can implement that, and then I might just record a video on how I coach, and like, let's just say 10 people watch it, and 5 people out of the 5 people use it, and then that 5 people can help more people, you know. So the reach would actually kind of like expand, even though I don't see that direct impact. But I do think that people's kind of like compass on what's fulfilling for them kind of change over time. But I do think at the end of the day, it really goes back down to helping people but the exact way someone helps someone would be very different across different individuals.
Yeah, and health is also very universal. So I feel like maybe it's a little bit over exaggerating that it's like by doing a lot of research on like human health and things like that, I feel like you're contributing to like almost like human evolution, and you know, like, you know, like, that's a big thing. I feel like it is. I do think that people always talk about health, you know, like doctors are at the front line of health, you know, and I definitely agree. But I think that I did a presentation once to like final year medical students, and they were all like, oh my, I didn't know that
this nutrition information, these are the nutrition information that's out there, because for doctors, a lot of them, they tell me that they take a general nutrition course in year 1 and then they forget all about it, so a lot of doctors out there don't actually have a good grasp of nutritional knowledge, so I do think that because people eat every day, as someone who kind of like is specializing in sports and exercise nutrition, but also have a general understandings that is slightly higher than the average population, I can kind of like help people understand what they do in terms of food choices and stuff. I always tell most of my nutrition athletes that I coach, I said, you can stop training, right? I said that if one day I tell you, hey, stop training, you can actually stop training, but you cannot stop eating, because if you don't eat, you will die, So eating is so universal that if it's something that you do all the time, surely putting some effort into it would actually benefit your life. Yeah.
And you just mentioned about doctors. Did you ever think of becoming a doctor? Because I feel like that's very similar to what you want to do as well.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, medical school is really difficult, but and it's also really expensive. It has definitely crossed my mind before of becoming a doctor, but I don't think that the circumstance and the environment that I was in kind of allowed me to do that. So I'm glad that I'm glad that I am in my current career, so I wouldn't change a thing. But like I said, I do think doctors, they do an amazing job as well. But like I said, we both impact, both careers actually help people, but we help people in different ways, albeit sometimes quite similar.
Right. Well, all in all, I think it does sound really exciting to, work really hard on something that is really meaningful and something that you love, it's something that that's sounds really, really good. And also, you are a powerlifting athlete yourself. And I wonder, do you watercut? Do you do any rapid weight loss? Do you use any rapid weight loss strategies as well when you compete?
Yeah, so it's a funny question because prior to this, my last competition was November last year, and prior to that, I've never done any rapid weight cutting strategy. So for all your listeners out there who have no idea what rapid weight cutting is, essentially is losing a large amount of weight in a short period of time. And the way I explain it is, if boxers or MMA fighters, they have to make weight in a certain weight class, right? Powerlifting, we have weight classes as well, just to scale, just to scale for people who are heavier, right? The lighter competitor cannot be competing against someone who's 2 times or 2 times their body weight. So we have weight classes, and to make weight, a lot of powerlifters actually train or at a higher body weight than the class they compete in. So during the last week before competition, they would try to make weight, right? So that's kind of a brief overview of what rapid weight cutting is. But personally, this is one of the heaviest I've ever been in my life. But prior to that, I've always been growing into my weight class. And I say it's a funny story because all my friends here, they said this guy is the expert on weight cutting, but has never weight cut in his life, so it's a joke where it is a joke that we kind of pass around. And until last year, I did my first ever rapid weight cut, and I would definitely say that as someone who knows how to help people cut weight, performing it myself has given me a little bit more empathy on the process, right? I do think that you can gain empathy in a couple of ways. One for me is I coach a lot of athletes, and after gathering a lot of information from multiple athletes, and if a lot of athletes say the same thing, it is likely that it is true. For example, if there's only one person saying that the sky was green today, then and other people say oh no, the sky was not green, right? Then it's likely that's not true. But if let's say 10 people say the sky was green today at this time, then there's a likelihood that that information is more true, So after a while, when a lot of athletes tell me the same thing, you kind of try to gather information. But I think the only way for you to verify 100% that the sky is green is for you to look up and see that the sky actually is green for yourself. So in that sense that I experienced it and I can kind of relate, So I did it once, and it was not as fun, but you kind of like have to persevere through. And I also felt like I needed to make weight, because if I don't make weight, I'll be literally known as the guy, the weight cutting expert that has never cut weight before, but the time he tried to cut weight, he didn't make weight. So it'll be a huge shame for me. So,
That
but
pressure.
yeah. So I actually made weight. And I was quite heavy, right? When I started, I actually weighed, I would say I was at the top end of my weight for my weight class. So I was like around 86 point, slightly less than 86.5, and I competed in 83 kilo class. So I said that would be the top end, right? Roughly around 4 to 5%. And yeah, I did make weight in the end. And I performed decent until I got until I injured my lat on my second deadlift. But I still had a meet PR. So that was all good.
Right.
Yeah.
And you said that helped you, going through it yourself, helped you empathize a little bit with your clients as well. What kind of things, is it because the rapid weight loss itself was hard? Is that something that you empathize with?
Yeah, so the process itself can be quite difficult, like simple things where you just tell your athletes, oh, drink X amount of water, right? And then they'd be like, for you, it'd be like, I'm just giving them instructions to drink a lot of water. But as someone who's practicing it, I need to be like, oh man, I need to count how much water I actually consume. And if I only were to go by memory, 100% I will forget, So that would probably tell me when I speak to my athletes, make sure you count the amount of water that you're going. Use something to track the amount of water you're drinking. Don't just go by memory, right? Because you will forget, right? And things like that. And also things like, for example, let's say changing the composition of food, right? Losing gut weight. So you change your calories from more carbohydrate focus to more fat focus. And for the fact of the matter is that for someone who likes eating carbohydrates is probably really tasty. And to eat fat, just fat, right? So fat is tasty as well, especially when you have a lot of sodium. But you can't have a lot of salt when you're trying to lose weight because salt will hold on to water. So you're just eating fat. It's like, it's not like it's not the most delicious meal you will have. Then you kind of like empathize as well. And you try to go around, try to work ways to help your clients and athletes figure out food that is palatable and not as disgusting, things like that, and while taste is really subjective, it's just like some people would do fine in a high fat diet without any salt, but for those that do not, I can kind of like relate and say like, okay, this is something you can try. These are certain foods that I have, it has worked for me, right? And then you can kind of like make suggestions. So it does give you a lot insight into the actual process and the nuance of actually executing it, and things that really like whether you do it or not doesn't really affect the outcome, but it does affect the process, So those are like the nuance that I personally have experienced myself while performing the rapid weight cut.
Okay. And there are two ways. What is the other one that's not a rapid weight cut? That's a long-term weight loss, so like fat loss and things like that, right?
Yep.
So just comparing those two, you would assume that, if you're going to weigh the same amount on meet day, then what is like most beneficial for you? Like it sounds like it doesn't make a difference. But why is the rapid weight loss more beneficial?
I wouldn't say it's more beneficial per se. I would say it's a very case by case basis. In general, what I've seen so far is so I've actually just submitted this journal for publication. Hopefully it gets accepted. And this was based on the 2018 IPF Worlds. And the medalists tend to cut more weight, right? And at a higher level, perhaps it makes a difference, because at the end of the day, when you in powerlifting, you can win by 0.5 kilos, right? By breaking records. So 0.5 kilos is a very, very small difference, so perhaps the differences is actually magnified at a higher level. For someone who is new to powerlifting, who is competing their first meet, I would definitely not suggest that they perform any form of rapid weight cut. But if you would ask me what are the hypothetical benefits, it's the ability to train without being in a calorie deficit, So like, I know people who are like, I had a really shit day, but I felt so good after eating freaking 300 grams of carbs, and then I felt good during training. But let's just say if that person was in a calorie deficit and that person is trying to gradually diet to make weight, they cannot eat that 300 grams of carbs, right? And then they might not perform well in that training session. But if they have that opportunity to have higher food intake and knowing that they can safely cut weight while maintaining a higher calorie intake, that might potentially be more beneficial. So at the end of the day, I don't specifically think that, just because I'm like really, really heavy, it means that I will perform well if I cut weight. I do think that there's a sweet spot that if you exceed it, you might actually suffer a little bit more because you have to cut a lot of weight and you might not be able to kind of like recover from the cutting process and the stress that you put your body through, right? You also have to remember that any form of change to your body is going to be stress, right? The best is you don't have to, like that is why for new lifters, I just said don't have to do anything, just compete at your current weight. That is because if you're not doing anything, you're not putting stress on your body, right? The larger the change, the larger the stress, which means that if you are heavier and you have to cut more weight, you're putting a larger stress on your body in the same amount of time for someone that might have to cut less. And sometimes certain stress can be bearable for an individual, right? But sometimes the stress might be too high. And then if that person cannot recover from stress, that stress that they impose on themselves through cutting, they might actually suffer a performance decrement. And based on anecdotal evidence and also practical from experience from coaching, I would say maybe 3 to 4% would be the sweet spot for someone. Obviously the less weight you have to cut, the better it would be. Like I use this example, like I don't know when your podcast will be released, but I coach like Taylor Atwood for his nutrition, right? And I mean, I'm a strength guys coach, so it's never a strength guys thing when you don't mention Taylor Atwood, right? So I have to mention him. But we've never really cut significant weight before, simply due to the fact that the big meet where I coach him at Sweden was he had to travel, right? So you have to remember that traveling is also an additional stress, right? Flying across continents is also an additional stress. And if you have to cut a lot of weight on top of that stress might be really high. So you cannot look at it in isolation, but you have to factor everything in. If it's a local meet, right? Let's just say I wake up and the meet is 20 minutes away from my house, right? Yeah, cool. I might be able to cut more weight because everything else is quite constant. So the stress overall is slightly lower. But then again, like I said, everybody would be different. And even though the general guideline is roughly 3 to 4%, for most people, I do think that if you have the opportunity to not cut weight, unless you're trying to break a record, right? Try to enjoy the process of actually competing first before you actually try to compete, try to suffer before competing,
Yeah, I think that's really like it's easy to be said like that, but it's hard to, for example, if it was my first meet as a 52 kilo powerlifter in Japan, and I want to seem strong, as a 52 kilo athlete, and moving up to 57 kilos when there's a lot of bigger girls, and that's like really overwhelming. So I think it's very, I don't know if you can say normal, but it's common for you to be like, I really want to compete in a lower weight class, even though you are a little bit over because of that ego of wanting to be strong and things like that. So that's really, really hard as well.
Yeah, I think weight class changes as well can be a little bit more difficult for females, especially when it's going up a weight class, right? Culturally, right? I mean, especially for yourself as a Asian woman, right? Asian women, they're like, oh, cool, the smaller you are, the better, right? That kind of stuff. I mean, like say in Japan, even like men are not that huge, right? So imagine what the perception for women should, an ideal look for women should be like. So the societal pressure is even higher, right? And moving up a weight class for women can be actually a little bit more daunting, especially for yourself. If you have to move up a weight class, I think the recent change to the IPF where they actually introduced the 69 kilo weight class was actually to ensure that the jump from 63 to 72 is not that big, right? So 63 to 69 is only 6 kilos, but 63 to 72 is 9 kilos. And to tell a female, hey, let's gain 9 kilos, they'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to gain 9 kilos, right? And a 63 kilo female is already not like the smallest, especially in Asia, right? Like for yourself, you're only going up to 57 kilos. Can you imagine like another like 5 kilos? You're already probably not going to be the smallest looking. And then now you say, cool, I need to gain another 9 kilos. I'm like, oh no, this is going to be really difficult, right? There is also a psychological aspect to gaining weight for females that I find a little bit more prevalent compared to males. But I do think that the perception of always being at a lower weight class would allow you to kind of like be strong is not exactly true. While you might not see the instant benefit of moving up a weight class, it is actually more a long-term thing. You just have to ask yourself if you are doing powerlifting for the long term or not, right? If you are doing powerlifting for the long term, you might need to consider some long-term planning. But if you say like, cool, I have 2 years of like, I have these 2 years that are relatively free, right? And I'm just going to powerlift for 2 years, right? Perhaps then in the short run, competing in the lower weight class might be beneficial. So at the end of the day, it is the athlete's individual goal. But if you are actually struggling to make weight, especially as a junior, right? Then you would probably have to move up a weight class. When I coach at Worlds, I look at kind of like the athletes table, and whenever I see the juniors who are like in their weight class where they make weight by 100 grams, right? And I tell myself, all these athletes, if they want to improve, they're not going to compete in the same weight class as an open. Because if they're already borderline at the end of their weight class, and as a junior, right?
When you're still growing.
And we're still growing, right? And obviously you want to put on muscle mass, because like muscle mass in the long run is actually contributes to strength, right? You would definitely put on additional weight, especially if you are already lean. So in that sense, I would say that for most juniors out there, right, do be open to actually moving up a weight class, especially if it's in the long run. If you're young and if you're tall, right, it's likely that if you plan to do powerlifting in the long run, you would actually be in a weight class higher than you are currently competing in now.
And you said moving up might be a good idea if you struggle with making weight. What does the definition of struggle mean?
Right. So I would say that if you... one very good way to just put it is that if your whatever Wilks IPFGL points is not like improving, right? So if you make weight, for example, let's say the theoretical limit as a 52 kilo lifter is 52 kilos, correct? So as a 52 kilo lifter, if you're training for 3 years, right, and you only put like 1 kilo on your total, I'm like, man, you probably should consider going up a weight class. Because 1 kilo in 3 years, right? And if you have to cut weight every single time, right, in 3 years, and you're only putting 1 kilo, I'm like, that
Sounds
is
like me.
I mean, I'm glad you're in the 57 kilo class now then. So, and obviously every time, if you do perform really well in training, right, at a heavier body weight, and then you just absolutely gets demolished when you cut weight, right, at competition, then there are certain then you should probably consider it, right? Obviously, there are multiple factors, but I would definitely say that if you think, let's just say, for example, hypothetically, if you compete in a 52 kilo weight class, right, and you can only put up, let's just, for example, I'm just going to cook up a number in my head, let's say 330 kilos, right? And in 3 years, you get 335 kilos, right, at 52. But let's just say hypothetically, if you were to be 54 kilos, right, which means that you're 2 kilos heavier, right, you are definitely not, you have not maxed out the 57 kilo class, which is one class above, and you put 370, right? Like, and if that correlates to a higher overall, like, average score, then perhaps you are headed towards the right direction.
Right. 50.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And also, you mentioned height. Is that how much does height matter? Because when I'm considering right now, since I went through a really, really bad time cutting just last week, actually, thinking about going up a weight class, but a lot of girls that are in the 57s are a lot taller than me. So I feel like, am I... What is, like, scientifically speaking, like, is it okay if I move up? I will be like the smallest person there. It's just, how much does height matter?
I don't think that, like, for example, we always say that weight classes are height classes in disguise, because in general, if someone, let's just say there's no muscle, no meat, right? And it's just bones, right? The person that's taller would definitely be heavier just because they have more bones on them, that a taller person, it's very difficult for me to comment, especially in our culture, because in general, Asian women just like to be small,
That's true, yeah.
But for you, let's just say if you go out of weight class and you know that the 57 kilo, I don't know, whatever record or like total is like maybe 15 kilos of your best or 20 kilos of your best, I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty, like, perhaps they should go to 63 and you should be 57, for example.
Right.
I would definitely say that it's a combination of factors. If you're young and if you're tall, right, probably go up a weight class, and if you're struggling to make weight and you're young and you're tall, right, then go up to the weight class.
Right. But for example, like if I feel like if I moved up at 50 to 57, then I would just keep adding weight to my body. Like, for example, it doesn't necessarily have to be muscle. It could be, because I eat a lot of food. And I feel like if I moved up, I could be training at 60 kilos now. And, I would just keep repeating the same process. I don't know if that's like possible, but I have a feeling that if I do move up, then I will eat up, and then like, it'll just be a cycle of I have to cut again because I weigh 60 kilos. Like, how, what about the body composition? Like a leanness, like how lean should you be when you're like, as an athlete?
Yeah, I do think that I always say to a lot of my friends, I said, if you're not genetically gifted, right, it is quite unlikely that you look absolutely jacked in your weight class, right? But I would say try not to look at body composition too much, because what we want to do is to ensure if you're in the sport of powerlifting, you want to be stronger than you were, right? So if you are, let's just say, because there is also there is a threshold where in how much your strength would actually progress, right? It doesn't mean that if you're 60 kilos in 1 year, meaning your strength progress would be double the amount compared to if you are 58 kilos, So it's not like your strength progress is not linear. But if, let's just say, for example, using you as an example, if you're, let's just say right now, you're maybe like 54 kilos and you slowly gain weight and you total 370 kilos as a 56, correct? For example. And if you are 60, you might total 365. But if we factor that body weight into like the IPF score or whatever score, 360 at 56 would actually have a higher score than 60 kilos at 365, right? So you use your body weight as a factor to determine the score, right? And your total, because like I said, there is a theoretical and limit to how fast your strength can actually progress naturally. So it's not like if I put 5 kilos on my body weight, it's not like, okay, if I put 2.5 kilos on my body weight, I will gain 20 kilos. But if I put 5 kilos on my body weight, I'll gain 40 kilos, It's not it's not linear, and it doesn't just double, right? And like studies have actually shown that if you eat a lot of food, you might gain the same amount of weight as someone who is in a moderate surplus, right? Calorie surplus, but more of that weight would actually come from fat rather than muscle mass.
Right. Okay. So there's not really like a set percentage of body fat that you should really be aiming for, anything like that.
Yeah, I think everybody in general, everybody is quite different with any sport that is kind of like nutrition for sport in general. Think of it from this perspective that nutrition has to fuel your sport. Right, it has to allow you to have energy, right? To supply your body with nutrients and energy for you to perform during your sport. It's not an aesthetic sport where you're posing on stage like a bodybuilder, where you can just be absolutely starving, right? But after posing and flexing, you're done. But when there is a performance measure that you have as an outcome, what you actually have to remember is that nutrition would act as the support for your performance. And the ability to eat more, right, might potentially allow you to supply your body with more useful fuel to help your performance, right? So I think of it more from that perspective rather than looking at leanness. I do think that leanness is a bonus, right? But if you are trying to look lean at the expense of your performance, especially if your sport is a performance-based sport, in powerlifting is actually lifting the most weight, then you kind of like have to reevaluate your priorities.
Right. And, you know, if you do decide to move up, is the strength gains guaranteed? Did you say?
In general, like I said at the start, most people would just benefit from having the ability to eat more food. Like I said, the crazy thing about this is, if you look at Taylor Atwood, I've been coaching him for nutrition for almost close to slightly more than 2 years now. And his body weight hasn't really changed at all in those 2 years, you know?
Yeah.
Right? So I would say that, but his strength has definitely gone up quite exponentially, you know? So I do think that a combination of hard training, hard and smart training with good nutritional support will allow your strength to go up. My key question I always ask is the food that I'm consuming enough to support the training that I'm doing, provided that the training is not like some insane, like running 10K every day and then try to squat a 1 rep max kind of like doesn't make sense training protocol, right? So it's not really, I would say that it isn't guaranteed in the sense that I would gain more. But the fact is that if you're strength training, right, if you're doing resistance training, you should be gaining strength, right? The question is how long or how fast, right? And if there are factors like, let's just say you train 4 times a week and 3 of that 4 training sessions you go in and you're consistently tired because you cannot eat, right? There is a likelihood that those at the end of your training block, you might not be as strong compared to if you can potentially eat more and actually have great training sessions for all 4 training sessions. Your strength adaptation might be better, right? And I think that motivation wise is better as well, because I do think that psychologically it can be quite detrimental for someone to go in, day out, and absolutely feel like they've been beat up every single training session.
Right. Right. It's hard to know if your tiredness from training actually comes from like calorie, like you're not eating enough to fuel your training. Like because there are other factors like sleep or like injuries and things like that. I don't know. It's really tricky for me to know like if the quality of my training is really bad because of my food intake. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I was just not thinking enough. But I can imagine it to be a bit, I don't know, kind of tricky.
Yeah, I do think that like sleep plays a huge factor. You know, like I said that eating consists a very large part of life, but sleep definitely consists a larger part of life. And if something consists of such a large part of your life, surely trying to optimize it can just help you feel better in general, whether that's food or sleeping. But there are people that have come to me and said that, cool, right? Let's just say if I sleep well, perhaps I don't need that much food to actually feel better, right? Not to mention that people who are sleep deprived actually have elevated hunger signals. People actually feel hungry when they don't sleep. Then it forces them to eat more, right? Or at least creates the desire to eat more. And then if they are supposed to lose weight, they can't eat. Then they already feel miserable and they go to the training feeling miserable, and then without enough sleep, they don't have energy, and then now they cannot eat it. Then it's this vicious cycle of absolute torment, right? And then it's no surprise training sucks, you know. But let's just say if you cannot eat, right? If you cannot eat as much, but if you sleep well and you don't have that hunger signals trying to tempt you to eat, perhaps you might go into training a little bit mentally prepared. There are research out there that actually shows that performing a task, a mentally intensive task before training actually decreases training outcome. While I don't think it's exactly conclusive yet, it's not like, oh cool, if I have to go in every training session mentally fresh, like after I do some meditation or yoga, you know, I don't exactly think it's conclusive. But if if you are going into your training session feeling mentally beat up, there's a likelihood that you might perform a little bit poorly compared to if you go in well. So like I said, for people, sometimes food can be a reward to elevate their mood temporarily, and then it might allow them to train better, you know, because we have to admit that powerlifting really isn't that intensive in terms of energy consumption. We don't actually burn that much calories lifting weights, you know, right? And not to mention that we like rest 10 minutes in between sets. So, but sometimes and your body can only process like X amount of like carbohydrates in an hour. So you don't even, let's just say you eat 300 grams of carbohydrates in 2 hours before you train, right? You're not going to process and absorb all 300 grams into your body, but you probably feel like, yeah, I feel great, you know, after having this waffle with a lot of maple syrup and sugar, you know, like, yeah, I feel great now. Then if you go in to training with like an elevated mood, an elevated sense of well-being, you might train better, you know. But if, like I said, you don't have calories to spare, you cannot consume that 300 calories, you might just go in feeling absolutely crap, and then your training might not be good.
Right. So it could come from many factors, but if you are sleeping well and, you know, you're feeling great, but you're training shit, maybe, you know, food intake might be the problem. So yeah.
And sometimes it's not just the amount per se, right? You also have to look at the composition of food, right? Whether you're eating like food that has nutrients, right? You might just be eating, you might be getting enough carbohydrates and stuff. And I do think that while your macros are actually important in the long run, if you're not supplying your body with enough like minerals, vitamins, micronutrients, right, you would still not perform as well. So I don't think that if I can fit my macros, I only eat certain set of food. And let's just say, because let's face it, if you don't eat vegetables at all, right, because vegetables anyway, they don't constitute a huge like part of like whether it's a carbohydrate, whether it's carbohydrate, fats or protein. They don't really have a lot of them. So most people, at least a lot of people that I know, for the most part, if they eat a lot of leafy vegetables, they probably don't have to track it, right? Which means that they probably don't need to eat it as well in order to lose weight, you know. But if someone doesn't eat any vegetables or anything that's nutrient dense, and they are only eating things that are not as nutrient dense, in the long run, they might actually feel worse. And especially if they come to the point where they have certain vitamin deficiency, then that could affect them even greater, you know.
Affect them in ways of like your, not just your physical health, but your mental as well. Like how could, because I feel like that's very overlooked in fitness in general. It's all about macronutrients and not about micronutrients. And you would assume, like, you know, like, why would I need to take micronutrients? What are some ways that can really, micronutrient deficiency can affect your training? Is that just a lot of things, right?
Yeah, I'm not really an expert in like micronutrients per se, but I did know in general, let's just say the most applicable one would be vitamin D, which most people get from sunlight, or should get from sunlight. But nowadays, because of work and being sedentary, and if you live in a country with seasons and you don't have much sunlight during winter, right, you can actually not have enough vitamin D. And vitamin D actually has like a relation to like muscle mass, you know, like, and some people even find that vitamin D like deficiency could affect like mental well-being and things like that, right? And things like, you know, for example, if you are deficient on like zinc and like magnesium, that might actually like affect like sleep and relaxation and all of that kind of stuff, right? But the only way you can find out if you're deficient or not is to actually get blood work done, right? But in general, I would say that for people who don't have, like, for example, I tell like my athletes who during the winter months stay indoors, I say, cool, it's probably good for you to have some vitamin D supplement, right? Because you probably don't really get it enough from food, things like that. So I'm not, like I said, once again, I'm not an expert in actual vitamin micronutrients and how it actually affect like athletic performance. But I do think that if you are not, if you only consume, if you fit your macro style and try to fit as much junk into there is a likelihood that you might be deficient in the long run.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like not only the micronutrients are overlooked, but more the diet is really overlooked in powerlifting. Well, especially, I don't know about the United States nowadays, like there's a lot of information, but in Japan, I don't think anybody really talks about like a diet for powerlifters. We don't at all. It's all about training and the programming and things like that. So I feel like this information is really, really valuable.
Hopefully like listeners out there would be able to grasp certain concepts. I think at the end of the day as well, like helping people understand and be aware of the environment would be important. Like I do think that Asian cultures tend to be a little bit more carbohydrate heavy, right?
Yes,
and I mean, it's great. I love rice. And they might be like lacking protein or even like, for example, carbohydrates that actually are more complex in nature that actually might have more vitamins, right? For example, like I'm not saying rice is bad, but rice tend to have a little bit less nutrients compared to say like a potato, that kind of stuff. So I do think that varying your sources could be very important, right? If you're only sticking to a single source of food, is likelihood that you're missing out on something because you're just not eating that, right? It's not that this food is bad. It's just that you should eat something else as well. As well as what you're currently consuming, right? I think a lot of the like people always tell me, parents be like, let's become vegetarians because it'll be healthy. And then like there are studies that show that vegetarians are healthier compared to people who eat meat. But those people that are only eating meat out there, they don't eat veggies at all. So why not have the best of both worlds? You can eat the meat, but have a salad every time you eat meat, right? In general, a good rule of thumb is to always have vegetables with your meals, right? Not only for the nutrients, but it also like helps you feel full, right? So which is very useful when someone is trying to lose weight. So I do think creating an awareness towards certain cultures, especially in the Asian culture, would be very useful. Like in America, like for example, the stereotypes are fast food culture, we eat all that kind of stuff, right? But the fact is that, and then those like fast food culture, they lack certain stuff like nutrients or whatever, or like they're more like fat biased. Whereas the Asian culture, we don't really eat a lot of fast food. Let's just say if it's more like home cooked food, right? But we still eat we lack protein sources. So we eat a lot of rice, right? A lot of like carbohydrate based stuff. Then we lack certain things that might be present in the fast food culture. For example, protein, right? Even though we have less fat. So it's not really trying to demonize something and say one is better than the other. But let's just see what you are currently missing out on and then try to work your way once you identify what you're missing out on.
It's some foods like in Japan, like in other Asian countries, like fermented foods and tofu and soy. It sounds very like healthy in a way as well. Like Japanese foods might, but I guess like you said, we don't really eat that. We don't have like steak every week, or like we don't eat burgers and things like that. It's like it's not within the culture. So I guess every culture has its ups and downs as well.
I like Japanese food a lot, but I do definitely see that people always have the perception that Japanese food, you eat like sushi and sashimi all the time. Like, nah, mate, like that is not like, if you can do that in Japan if you're rich, but most of the time you eat like some form of like donburi or like ramen, and like ramen you have like 2 pieces or 3 pieces of char siu, that's, and maybe like half an egg, right? That's like definitely not enough protein, right?
I sometimes wonder if Japanese food is healthy after all. Like ramen is definitely not balanced at all.
I do think that the most balanced cuisine in general in Asia is like Korean, because Korean, they have a lot of like vegetable side dishes. Right. And the vegetable side dishes is like free. So when you finish it, you can refill. Right. So you can actually eat a lot of veggies, right? If you have like Korean food. But like Japanese food in general, like if you go and have like, let's just say a donburi or a ramen, the veggies like sprinkles of vegetables, right? You basically don't get a lot of that if you eat out, or you give like edamame, right?
Yeah, and like when you go to a ramen place, you get the ramen as your meal, and then the side dish is a bowl of rice.
Yeah.
Just like,
Well,
wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So in general, I think that a lot of cultures they lack cultures would lack certain things, right? Some you like I said in just general Asian cultures are very like carbohydrate heavy, right? They tend to lack a little bit more meat. Even in Malaysian cuisine as well, our street food, we have a lot of carbohydrate based stuff, and I do think in general that meat is slightly more expensive in Asian countries, so that's why we don't really see it in large abundance compared to like the Western world. But yeah, I do think that a good rule of thumb is that you have a good amount of protein, enough carbohydrates to keep you full, and I would just say always have vegetables or some fruit when people eat, and that is a good rule of thumb for people to have. And I do think that it's something that people can easily implement. I always say to people, if you know that you go out, you're going to eat with your colleagues at work, and you're going to have this food, right? Bring an apple, bring a fruit that you can eat after, right? If you know you don't want to eat like a salad, just have a fruit, and then when you go back home and you can have dinner and prepare your dinner, then eat more vegetables then, right? So there's a lot of practical things that people can do to take a look after their nutrition. But if you just generally go with the flow, right? You probably won't cut it. And it's very different as well for people who train versus people who don't train. For example, if you work in the corporate world, your colleagues might not train. So they can go by, right, with poor nutrition, right, and function just fine, because a huge part of their body doesn't have to recover from lifting weights or exercising. Right. They can go by. Is it optimal? Probably not. I have like friends come and tell me that, I can function on 5 hours of sleep or 5 and 6 hours of sleep. Why can't you function? I was like, dude, like I also train 5 times a week. You don't even exercise, right? So I said that our demands are very different. And if that's your choice, and if that is your choice and you don't want to exercise but sleep 5 to 6 hours, yeah, go ahead, but I want to exercise. Then therefore I need like maybe 8 hours or maybe 9 hours of sleep, right? That's just because the demands are so different. And you kind of have to understand, going back to the point of understanding what your personal goals are and how your current environment either brings you closer or actually pulls you back away from them, and then how you can kind of like work out the differences and try to optimize it to the best of your ability, because you won't be able to 100% be so obsessive to the point where you can handle every single matter, and I also don't think that is like healthy, right? In general.
Right. So, and it's all about noticing your behaviors and your environment and your lifestyle, and then trying to work out something that you can stay consistent with that. Yeah. But like I think that is why I think like one-on-one coaching, like you being a nutritionist for a certain type of athlete, is really important, because it's not like you're providing one set of thing that anyone can use, because everyone has different lifestyle, right? So I feel like having someone that knows you and knows your lifestyle and knows how you're going to be like, and then trying to, come up with a nutrition thing would be really beneficial as well.
Everybody is different. On the surface, right, things might look okay, but I think once, for myself as a nutritionist, as I dive deeper into how someone eats, right, everybody is very different. For example, I use this example. One of my clients, we were looking at her breakfast, and she said, "Oh, cool. I usually jump on the video call with anyone that wants to sign up." And she said, "Oh yeah, my breakfast is usually quite healthy. I have oats, I have eggs, coffee." And then when I asked her to tell, like, that is what she told me on video, but I said, like, write down everything write down everything that you have for breakfast in as much detail as possible. So yeah, she have oats, but she also have 1 tablespoon of sugar with her oats, right? And then she have 2 teaspoons of sugar with her coffee, and she have 1 coffee during breakfast and 1 coffee after. Right. That's like, right when you wake up, that's like heaps of sugar, Yeah. Not saying sugar is bad, but right, in small amounts, right, it's fine. But if you're having so much sugar when you wake up, and if your goal is to lose weight, right, for the purpose of losing weight, surely if you can cut out the sugar or replace it with something else, and you that might bring you closer towards your fat loss goals. Because the fact is that those sugar, whether you put in your oats, it really doesn't make much of a difference in terms of how full it makes you feel or the nutrients that it contributes. So if you swap it out, for example, like I said, cool, just go buy some artificial sweeteners, right? And then have some artificial sweeteners instead of sugar.
Yep.
And just like that, right? My client's weight dropped just by changing something simple.
Right.
And my client's lunch, dinner, snack, I could change all of it, right? There are things that I want to change. But if I look at it and I said, cool, I think the breakfast is the thing where I can change the most. I change it first. But for an athlete, it might not be that, because for some athlete, their breakfast might be fine, right? They might be struggling with lunch. For example, all they eat is lunch. I just eat an apple and drink a glass of coffee. That's my lunch, right?
Yeah.
So everybody's very different as an individual. That's why looking as a nutritionist, sometimes you just really, really go down and think like, okay, what is the simplest way, right? What is the simplest way I can help this person make a change towards their nutrition? Because the reason why they've been doing something, it's because it's second nature to them, which means that it is something that they don't even have to think and they just do it. It's a habit, right?
Habit, yeah.
And the bigger the difference or the bigger the change, it means that it strays away further from their current habit, which also implies that it's harder for them to adopt, correct?
Right.
Because if it's easy for them to adopt, they would already have adopted it, right? So how can I make them adopt it, right? And do it consistently. Obviously, it cannot be too hard, but it cannot be the same as what they're currently doing. It just has to be, what's the smallest thing I can help them do? And once they nail it, then you say, cool, let's progress. And the thing is that once you help them make small changes, they see the results, and that result actually motivates them. People always say that, people always say, I need motivation to do this. But I think that motivation, you don't need motivation to do this at the start. You need discipline, and your results will give you motivation. But to get your results, you need discipline at the start to achieve certain set of results, and then you can use your results to motivate you further. So I do think that that framework and that thought process kind of like works at the back of my mind. Obviously, I don't speak to all my athletes like giving them like a motivational talk or like Gary V or something like that. But but I just tell them, cool, let's just make a small change, right? Do you think you can do this, right? How hard is it for you to be able to implement this? If they say, cool, I can do it, then I'll be, yeah, I take your word for it. Show me that you can do it. And once they've done it, let's progress from there.
Yeah, I definitely, I read a book by Mark Manson, Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. It says about, you don't have to be motivated to do something. It's more like you do something even if you're not motivated. And those actions that motivate you to do more. Yeah.
I think discipline takes, if you only do things when you have motivation, if people in the world only do things when they only have motivation, I don't think that we will be where we are today. A lot of times, like hard work, we definitely need to be disciplined and be consistent. There are things where even sometimes I use this like simplistic analogy. It's like, I say the difference between a child and an adult is that an adult would just do things. They have to do things even though they don't want to do it. Whereas a child would be just like, when you're a baby, they just like, if I don't want it, I just cry. And then my mom would just like, cool, take away this food that I don't want to eat. But when you're an adult, sometimes you don't have a choice. So I always say like, sometimes you just need more discipline. And once you start seeing results, then that results itself will motivate you. And then it will be less, the amount of discipline you need is less, because now it comes a little bit more second nature for you. Yeah.
It's a snowball effect, right?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, so we're just coming up on time, but just to summarize a few things and going back a little bit to weight cuts. If you're thinking about moving up in weight, these are the people who needs to think about moving up in weight class. If you're cutting more than 3 to 4% of your body weight, that's one thing, right? And two, if you're a junior and you're struggling to make weight because you have more potential to grow and put on more mass and you're setting yourself back. And also 3, if you're not making progress over a few years, that's another thing. And 4th, maybe you're feeling like shit every time you go into training because you're not fueling your training. And also, is there any other things that is it like a sign that you should move up a weight class?
I think those are quite good. Like I said, but everything has a caveat. So I would just add like as a coach, there's always like context and caveat. So like the first point where what's the first point that you said again?
The first one is if you're cutting more than 3 to 4% of your body weight.
Yep. So I would say that 3 to 4% is the theoretical safe range. So once you exceed that, then there's a likelihood that you have to consider. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but I would say that when you exceed that, the likelihood of decrement for performance is larger, right? So that's one. That's the caveat, right? Obviously, people would be able to put up with small amounts of performance decrement, especially if your competitors are not that competitive, right? So that's the first caveat. The second one is if you're a junior, right, and you plan to do this for the long term. So the caveat is if you plan to do it for the long term. If you don't plan to do it for the long term, like I said, you might be fine in 2 years. And then the third one is
not making progress.
Then like I said, you have to consider factors like, oh, is it because maybe reduce your training frequency because work is busy and you cannot train as often, or are you trying to trying to nurse an injury, right? Factors like that, right? You have to consider that as well. Doesn't mean that, oh, cool, if I gain weight and I train less than I've done before, because clearly I'm not making as much gains as before because my training has been reduced. You know, or for example, somebody that has a new child, right? Their sleep is going to be crap and they can't train as often because they have to take care of the baby. Gaining weight will probably not make you not skyrocket your gains. And then that is a caveat as well. And the last one is just like if you're feeling like crap, right? Obviously you have to take into consideration your sleep and factors outside your training.
I feel like you can make like a podcast episode. You can make like 10 podcast episodes on weight cutting.
Yeah, I talk a lot of I can talk a lot. So yeah, but I do find that this conversation is quite it's very different because people generally ask me, what are certain methods of doing this? What are certain methods? And like people always talk about the methods. Yeah. And that is I'm more than happy to do so. But I like the softer side of coaching as well. And I think that's very important because at the end of the day, speaking to your athlete, giving them confidence is very important as a coach. Because like if you are freaking out, your athlete's already freaking out, even though you might be freaking out, you can't show them that you're freaking out. So like the softer side of coaching is very important because you can kind of like handle, you learn how to handle like specific situations, which is why I like to talk about it. And the more situations that I can bring to light, I think it helps other people empathize as well that, oh, I'm not the only one that is going through this, you know? And I think empathy and knowing that you're not alone makes it a little bit more bearable, you know, that if you're going through hell, you know, at least you have like 10 other people that has gone through hell and they actually came out fine. So it'd be like, gives yourself a little bit more confidence. So yeah, in general, I like to talk about this because people don't often speak about it. And I think the fact of the matter is that there are no like step 1, step 2, step 3. A lot of people like step 1, step 2, step 3, right? And I can give them that. But I think a change of pace in conversation like this is very useful in general.
It really does. I mean, following a method is really, it's not hard, but it's easy to, you know what you're going to do. But I think conversations like this really make you think. I think that going back down to the level where as a coach, for any coach that's out there listening, is that you also have to consider that your athlete's a person, right? Your athlete's a human being, right? And a human being would experience very different thing from another human being. And you always have to keep that in mind when you coach someone, right? Your method or your training or your structure system has to evolve when it, from athlete to athlete, right? And I'm not saying change everything, right? Do a 180 change, right? You have certain principles, right? You have certain principles in place. And then how you achieve those principles, you have to factor in your athlete's opinion. You have to factor in how they respond, you know. And then it's not the easiest thing to do because sure, I wish I could tell everybody the same thing, right? And then they would all achieve the same end goal, but that's not the fact of the matter is not that. And I think that is what would separate the good coaches from the ones who are not so good, and probably it's also why I still have a job, I guess. That's true. Well, yeah, it's almost like knowledge is important as a coach, but also like the willingness to empathize with people, and it's almost like psychology, you know?
Yeah.
Listening.
I mean, at the end of
Empathize is hard sometimes.
I think the fact of the matter is that you always think that as a coach, you know more than the athlete, right? By definition, that should be true, right? But if you come from the position that you know more than the athlete and the athlete cannot provide anything for you, I think that the coaching process and the relationship will not be as well developed and robust as if you're coming in with an opinion to learn, right? If you go back in time, I'm kind of like a little bit like a philosophy nerd as well. So you go back in time, like the great philosopher Socrates said that. So Socrates is basically like, I mean, for this like really prominent Greek philosopher, right? He's probably like the father of like philosophy. And in basically the oracle, right? The oracle is like this like mystic thing that says that Socrates is the wisest man in this town. And then Socrates didn't believe it. And Socrates went out and like kind of asked people about stuff. And then Socrates at the end came to terms, say that the reason why I now believe that I'm the wisest man in this place is that at least I know that I don't know things, whereas everybody here think that they know everything, right? So they are already in a state of ignorance, but at least I know that I'm ignorant, right? So he said that is why he's the wisest. So I think as a coach as well, you kind of have to know that, yeah, sure, I know something, but there are other people out there that knows more than me, not in the sense that they know more knowledge, but their experience is different, and their experience can contribute towards my current base of knowledge, and it helps me evolve my process, you know? So I think that is very, very important. I mean, like Socrates has been dead for like ages now, but I think that this like wisdom actually helps anyone in general kind of like have a sense of humility towards everything they do. I think once, like pride definitely comes before a downfall. Once you think you know everything and once you're prideful, you know, you are often like blinded because you think you know it all. And then, you know, the next thing you know is like, cool, you see your own downfall because of that.
Right. And a perfect example of it is like you're going through a PhD of rapid weight loss yourself, and going through that process and realizing that the things that you haven't noticed as a coach is also like really profound as well. I think there's always more room to learn whether you're a coach or not. And
yeah, and there definitely will always be room to learn, you know. I do think that in today's like day and age, in like social media as well, we are quick to dismiss other people's thoughts, people's opinion, right? And we often are very uncharitable. We always think that, oh, this person is saying something that is different for me because this person is against me, you know? And I'm like, I mean, is that really the case, right? Maybe this is the thing that the person has been brought up with, and the person is just saying the thing that he or she knows. Doesn't mean that person is against what you think, you know? And I think of being charitable and saying that, cool, what I always like to think that when someone has a different opinion from me, I'm not trying to think that they are wrong because of this. I'm not trying to be like, cool, they are spreading misinformation to make a quick buck or to like benefit them. But what I like to think is that they are trying to contribute to society, but our methods are different. Maybe because this is all they know, and perhaps it could be the case that this is all I know, and maybe I can learn something from them.
Yeah, maybe
and I think
don't
that's very
understand their
important.
point of view.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I'm in the wrong all the time, but I do think that you kind of have to like if someone comes to me and tell me that, cool, right, a dog is not a four-legged creature and a dog only has two legs, in most cases that person will be wrong, unless the person chop off two legs from a dog, then they will also be wrong because they chop off the dog's legs. But yeah, there are things like that we are quite like non-negotiable, you know, but most like when there are more nuance involved, I think it helps to hear and speak to people and kind of like understand their point of view.
And even you saying that as a researcher and a PhD candidate is also it's bringing empathy to a whole new level, I think.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to science, it's like the reason why science is here is because science understand that there are things in the unknown to be discovered. Science doesn't really say, like, we don't do science because we know everything. We do science because we don't know things, and that is kind of the role of science. And I also do think that there are certain things that, like, science would not be able to explain, so, like, you have to be open to possibilities of all kinds as well, right? And I do think that the ability to continue learning is very important, right? And I always say, always be quick to listen and slow to speak. But today's society is very different, right? You always have to speak first, right? Don't listen,
Yeah.
Right? You have to,
especially social media, it's about attention. Like, who gets
exactly.
attention first?
I have to speak first, so I'm the first one to say it, and I don't care what other people say as long as I'm the first one to say it. Doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong, And I don't think that is kind of like, I that is not personally how I like to like live life, and especially when it comes to like controversial stuff or should I have a high carb or low carb? I'm like, cool, like, tell me, why do you think a low carb diet is beneficial, right? Then I'll listen to you, right? And then now that I've listened to you, would you like to listen to what I have to say? And then we can have a discussion, right? And if they say no, because I'm right, then it reflects on their character more than it reflects on mine. That's like, cool, right? If you don't want to listen to me, fine, I'll listen to you, So I do, and perhaps then I kind of, even in that sense, I would be able to gain certain knowledge, like, this person, the knowledge I gain is that this person probably don't want to engage in discussion. So I think at the end of the day, it's when you listen first, there's much more to gain than only speaking quickly and then just saying my word is the most authoritative one and it's infallible.
People who are not willing to listen, if you say anything, they're not willing to accept anything. So you can't really do anything about it, right? Yep.
100%. Yeah.
And people like that. Anyways, what if people want to see your works? Where can they reach you on social media?
Yep, I think the best place to reach me would be my Instagram, Kedric TSG. So just my name is TSG, or you can reach me via email as well, kedric@thestrengthguys.com.
Okay, I will be linking that in this description. And also, like, you've been on a lot of podcasts, and people who want to hear about the more of like the methodology of rapid weight loss as well. Maybe you can. What podcasts have you done that you can recommend?
Yeah, I would definitely say the most comprehensive one I've done, not because of me, but also because of the other experts that we had that I was on the podcast with, would be Iron Culture, right? Iron Culture podcast by Omar Isuf and Eric Helms. And you can just search Iron Culture Rapid Weight Loss. So I had like my friend and colleague, David Nolan from Ireland, and another Irish mate, Arthur Lynch from Ireland as well, and we discuss rapid weight cuts for the strength athlete. And recently I also been on Arthur's podcast called No Lift Podcast, in which I talk about like specific methods, and there are a lot. So I do think that these two are the ones that come to mind. I've been on King of the Lifts as well to discuss rapid weight cutting with Ricky Cho, but that podcast quality wasn't so good because I had some audio issues on my end. So I think the one that you would definitely go and find the most comprehensive would be the Iron Culture podcast.
Yeah, definitely go check it out. You will probably benefit from that also. I will be linking that on the description. So, thank you so much, Kedric, for being on the show today.
Pleasure's mine. I hope that I've enjoyed my time. Hope you did as well, and I hope all your listeners out there would benefit from this.
Barbell Radio.
Thank you very much.